Good morning. This is the sermon for Sunday, November 29th. This begins a new part of the church year. This is the first Sunday of Advent. Advent is a time of anticipation, of expectation, of waiting. Advent is also a dark time. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, not only does Advent encompass the darkest days of December and the longest nights, but Advent also, in the church, used to have the same colors of Lent. There are a few reasons for this. One, it's not like Jesus didn't know what was going to be coming. We certainly believe that the Son of Man, that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, willingly chose his life among us. And two, the gospel for Advent always begins at Jesus' speech about the destruction of the temple, which occurs on the Tuesday of Holy Week. And that means that Advent, even though we will very quickly shift towards the coming of Jesus, the incarnation of him as a baby, it means that we are approaching Jesus at the start, at the very end of his ministry. And that can be helpful for us. Today's gospel is Mark chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. They will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as a branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. The Gospel of the Lord. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm also, as part of these, going to be doing videos later on where I try to link to a classical rock song and talk about how that can how that might fit too. It's worth pointing out that Jesus in chapter 13, verses 14 through 23, speaks of the destruction of the temple, which when it's occurred, first in 587, and then will later on occur in 70 CE, has been climactic in Judaism, has caused people to dramatically rethink things. When Jesus does this, that's why he is talking about a complete sea change in people's lives. I wonder how much people reading that this year, I wonder how often people reading about that event think about churches closing or reclosing because of coronavirus restrictions. I wonder, as we read about someone preparing, how much we think about preparations that we have had, whether they be preparations to get all the hand sanitizer, buy all the toilet paper, or get lots of rice and beans because they keep for a while, or all of the different ways that we prepared in our personal lives for the pandemic. And as it's gone on, um, what preparations we overdid it on. I mean, how many people now have more toilet paper than they would need for the next year? And what preparations we missed, what preparations that we should have had more of and didn't realize and are now missing. Um, Jesus, when he is speaking of his coming, on the one hand, he says that the signs of his return will be obvious. You know, it's like looking outside during the spring and seeing the leaves begin to sprout. And here in Oregon, as it's, almost December and it's rain so much, hearing about the spring when we get more sunny days, when it gets warmer, spring sounds pretty good right now. In some ways, it feels like it's going to be a rough winter. And Jesus says it's going to be like looking for the spring. And I can look for the spring. I can see the crocuses start to go up in my neighbor's yard. I can, recognize those things. But then he says in verse 32, about that day and that hour, no one knows. Neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, even Jesus. It's a reminder that though we can plan for a lot of things, though humanity can propose, it is God ultimately who disposes of things. It is God who ultimately is the one who acts, who moves us in this life. Mark commonly uses a chiasm or a frame. And a frame is a story that will start talking about story A, will move to start talking about story B, will complete story B, and then we'll come back to story A. And usually when he does this framing structure, the two will help interpret each other. Our understanding of story A helps us to understand story B, and how story B wraps up helps prepare us for the conclusion of story A. This framing structure we're going to find throughout the Gospel of Mark. It was a common writing practice back then. Mark does it far more than any of his contemporaries. In some ways, it feels like we are in that framing structure. It feels like we're in that framing structure as the church decided for safety, for love and care of neighbor, to go to online worship in March, that we did summer worship, and now we're back into predominantly online worship or parking lot worship back in November. And in the midst of that frame, I can think of both Sunday services where we have seen each other, outside behind masks, our eyes smiling in a glow. I can think of Bible studies. I can think of, different porch visits. I can think of being with families in the midst of mourning and of loss. And I can think in all of that, what our preparation truly has been as a community hasn't been on trying to have safe COVID procedures, although those are important. It hasn't been on the financial questions, although those are important too. Our preparation as a community is in all the ways the people of Faith Lutheran Church, and indeed any Lutheran church or any church period, take care of each other. All the ways people reach out, all the ways that food has been dropped off, all the ways that people have sent letters and cards. I know some of our members have spoken about being overwhelmed. It's going to be a long winter, but we're going to get through it. And we are going to get through it because we have Jesus, the Son of Man, who is with us each and every step of the way. He didn't let something, small like death get in the way of his loving us and he promises to be with us. That's the framing structure of the Gospel of Mark for us today. That though it begins by talking about the end of things, it reminds us that the end of things is a joyous thing, because it is when Christ's reality will become ours. It is when all sin and pain and death and sadness will go away, and we will be joined with God's joy for all eternity. Amen.